Welcome to the October 6, 2021 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm, East Coast Executives. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. The Digital Career Success Series, DCSS, is a professional development series that helps members of our Urban League Young Professional chapters and other diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers through digital platforms such as webinars and Facebook Live. The goal is to provide an opportunity for professional development right from one's computer. Today's DCSS Virtual Equity, sponsored by Verizon, features Dr. Yolanda Lewis. But first, I would like to introduce America Baez of Verizon. America, how are you?
Hey, Ken, good. Happy to be here. This is our third or fourth webinar with NUL, and we're thrilled to be connecting with your members. And Dr. Yolanda, I can wait to hear your presentation. Being, myself being in HR and talent acquisition, this is, equity. This is something that we talk about all the time, and especially, what over the last year and a half with all the racial issues out there. This is an important topic for sure, and for all of us to understand what equity means and what we need to be aware of. So thank you.
Wow, we definitely appreciate you and Verizon for partnering with the National Urban League on this important DCSS platform. Truly move the world forward together with Verizon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Listen, all right, so America, I'm gonna jump into the show here and introduce everybody to Dr. Yolanda. Listen, I just was sitting here speaking with her. I had the pleasure of sitting on a panel and just observing her work a few weeks back. Me, Dr. Yolanda, Princess Jenkins, it was amazing. And immediately after we got off, I sent her a text on the side and said, hey, I need to bring you to the Digital Career Success Series so I can share you with our audience. Dr. Yolanda, we have a great audience, and I would like for you to introduce yourself to them. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'm Dr. Yolanda Lewis Ragland, and I go by Dr. Yolanda because I like to be personable. I meet my patients and my clients where they are, and I really am here to be partners with you all in wellness and in health. And so one of the things that I'm very excited about talking about today is how certain things that we experience, particularly today, we're talking about microaggressions and unconscious biases, but how these things actually affect our well-being and our health.
Well, we appreciate you being here. If you don't mind, please share a brief bio and tell our audience a little bit about you, because everybody, you'll see her when this TV show comes. I'm telling you, there's going to be a Dr. Yolanda show. It's like Dr. Oz, Dr. Yolanda. I know it's going to happen. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we move through this programming today. But Dr. Yolanda, please tell them a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I am a double board certified physician. I'm board certified in both pediatrics and bariatrics. What bariatrics is the medical management of weight loss. And I work here in Washington, D.C. in Ward 8. I'm also the owner and CEO of my practice. It's Family Fitness and Community Wellness, as well as the founder, president of my nonprofit, which is Dr. Yolanda Cares Foundation. And it's a organization that I put together to help close the disparity gaps in vulnerable communities. And one of the major programs that we do is something called Dr. Yolanda's Heart to Heart Red Carpet Affair. We do a heart health awareness event each year. And it was really important to me to bring children into this conversation. I was tired of going to the red dress events, and it was a bunch of adults talking about heart health. But what I recognize and what a very alarming statistic, just to put it out there, is the American Heart Association says that 49% of African American women have heart disease by age 20. That makes it a pediatric disorder. Not only is it a pediatric disorder because of that, but because we are dying early, or we have morbidity, which makes us either bed, bound to the bed or unable to work. That means that our children are being affected in those ways as well. So these are things that I try to do to give back to the community. And that's as brief as I can get. There's a whole lot of other stuff, but I will share later. Oh, I do want to be the author of a few books, actually several. I'm on number 7 now, but there are 2 that I wrote during the pandemic, Navigating a Triple Pandemic, Healthcare Workers of Color Confront Racism in America, Health Disparities in Medicine, and the Trauma of COVID-19. And I'm actually about to release an educator's edition. That's a special edition. And the foreword for that edition was written by attorney Ben Crump and his wife, Dr. Janae Crump, who's an educator. So I'm very excited about that project as well.
Well, we're excited to have you with us today. And this is a matter that really is close to the heart of the National Urban League community, virtual equity. I'm really looking forward to your presentation on this topic. I'll probably jump in on occasion with questions. I ask the audience to please submit your questions in the Q&A, although we will have a Q&A at the end. Dr. Yolanda has agreed to allow me to chime in every now and then and throw a question at her. So keep the questions coming, but in the meantime, I'll pass it over to Dr. Yolanda. Let's do it.
All right, so we're talking about microaggressions and unconscious bias. And the truth of the matter is, if we don't talk about it, if we don't address it, this is a situation, these are topics that your silence actually promotes violence. You have to do something if you see something. We talk about this all the time, but this is actually even more important in this situation. Next slide. So when we talk about racism, because before we start talking about microaggressions and unconscious bias and throw all of these words around, we really want to put some context into this. So racism itself, we know exists. And if you say it doesn't exist, then that's a whole nother conversation. And you're probably down there below the line under covert racism. But racism has those things that we know are happening that are socially unacceptable, that when we see it, we can actually name it. And no one's afraid to name it as racism. But then we have what we call covert racism. These are the things that are socially acceptable. This is where microaggressions and unconscious bias lives. So let's reveal just a little bit about this overt racism and covert racism. Overt racism are things that everyone could say and agree with are bad. And they would probably call it out and say something. Lynchings, seeing a swastika. If you actually saw someone in their white cape burning, with the hood, that would be the KKK. You would admittingly say, that's racist. We've gotten to the point where we can at least have that conversation, because at the time that wasn't even a conversation we could have, right? Hate crimes, the N-word, there's an asterisk there because some people feel like they're able to use it and it's not racist within the culture. If it can be used, why can you use it? We all understand why you can't use it if you're not a part of a culture. So that's the overt racism. Covert racism, there's so much down there below that line. I'm only going to call out a few. And there's a bunch of stuff that I didn't even write in because it was that much. But racial profiling, when you walk into a store and you're the one followed around because you're Black or brown and no one seems to be concerned about anyone else in the store, you already feel like, okay, something's happening. They're being racist in the store. Housing discrimination, redlining, whether or not someone claims it or not or knows that it's happening, we can show statistically that this has been going on for years. When we talked about the racial tensions that were happening in the street, and we wanted to call attention to Black Lives Matter, and you have people who will confront with, or who will retort with, all lives matter. No one ever said that all lives didn't matter, but at this time, we were focusing on something very specific. Self-appointed white allies, or the coming to the rescue. Those who say to you, I know how you feel, and I think this is terrible. What should I do about this? Sometimes these conversations might be genuine, but often it's a decision to help folks that could probably help themselves. We just need you to listen. We just need you to know that it's happening, and we need you to understand and just be ready when we give some instructions. But we're not going to be here, if you're the Black or brown person in the room, to have to teach everyone. And that's on here too. Expecting for us to teach white people what racism is. This is something that should be learned. This is something that companies should put time and effort and energy into. So there's a lot of stuff on here. The school to prison pipelines. There's the conversation about anti-immigration laws, assuming that good intentions are enough. When you have a conversation with someone who says that, you know, they meant it as a good thing, they didn't mean anything by it, well, that's not enough, because if it was hurtful, then we have to address it. So I'm going to go to the next slide, because this is something that we could talk about for a long time. What are covert racist acts? Because there are several, but hiring discrimination is actually one I wanted to leave with, since we're talking about jobs and job equity. There are several ways in which people do not hire based on a name that sounds too ethnic, if it's on the application. Sometimes even based on the way someone speaks, their accent, or, you know, whether they feel like, you know, the person is doesn't sound intelligent to them. Notwithstanding, they look on the application and see that they have degrees, and they have degrees from reputable places, that they make a decision based off of a speech pattern. That's discrimination. So the American Public Health Association in 2016 put out a national campaign against racism. And it asserts that racism is a social system, and it has multiple dimensions. There's the individual, and then there's the systemic. So the social system, individual racism is internalized or interpersonal. A person may affect one person, whether or not that means I won't allow you to use my services, or I won't perform a service at your wedding because I find out it's an LGBTQ wedding, right? That's interpersonal. I've decided to withhold my services. However, we also have systemic racism. That's institutional, that's structural. And the other thing that they pointed out was that this is a system, the structuring system, it gives opportunity to and assigns value to people just based off of a social interpretation of how they look. Now, the problem is it unfairly disadvantages some, and it unfairly advantages others. And we all know and understand the concept of white privilege. When you get something simply because you're in a particular group and you haven't earned it, this idea of meritocracy, when really it's about your lineage. That's a part of this structural system that the APHA was talking about. And I like what they said in their statement, and that is that racism saps the strength of the entire society through the waste of human resources, meaning there are people that we're not even tapping into, people that we're not getting resources from, and that we're not allowing to reach their full potential simply because we are disregarding them based on their race or their immigration status. So we'll go to the next slide. The conversation here, we're starting off, we want to talk about two topics, and I just want to make sure we're defining them. Unconscious bias, which is also referred to as implicit. It means it doesn't know, you're not quite sure you're doing it. You may not consciously be doing it, but it is still a prejudice. And it's unsupported judgments. This prejudice is unsupported by any real facts, but it's in favor of one thing or person or group. And then it's comparing that group to another. Usually it's considered an unfair comparison. As a result of these unconscious biases and these thoughts and these feelings that we have, certain people benefit and other people are penalized. The thing about, you can actually go to the next slide. The thing about unconscious bias is that it's 95% of the time is how our brains work. We will have this fast, automatic, we don't think about it. We put up something, you have a thought, immediate thought. And that's your unconscious bias coming out. What your preference is. And, this was a whole study done, little girls and dolls, where, they had a black doll and a white doll. And most of the girls preferred the white doll. A lot of it was connected to the fact that media had put in terms of what these little girls were seeing, all the commercials and everything they saw that was good was white. And they weren't seeing any of their faces in media or any of the good, wholesome pictures of families and things like that in magazines. And this was actually done pretty long ago. This was in the 60s. But the point is, this is your unconscious bias working, that 95% of the time, it's that quick thinking, that automatic impulsive thinking. Whereas we have another part of our brain that's a slower, more deliberate thought process. We're a little bit more reflective, but we only utilize that about 5% of the time. So the job of all of ours, our goal is to start tapping into system 2, where we actually begin reflecting on some things before we act and before we make these decisions. Then we're going to talk about microaggressions. We're going to go ahead and define that. So these are the everyday verbal or nonverbal slights or snubs, insults, and they're intentional sometimes, and sometimes they're not intentional. Everything that's a microaggression is not intentional. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. But the problem is they communicate something. They communicate hostility. They are derogatory statements or actions, any kind of a negative message toward a group that's marginalized. And there are several marginalized groups. Of course, I didn't name them all. I just put a few here: immigrants, women, people of color, LGBTQ plus community. There's ageism. There is ableism, right? There are people those who may have a disability. There's all kinds of groups that are marginalized. So I just named a few here. So if you don't see a group here belong to, please don't think that I purposefully left it out. But remember, with virtual working here, there's only so much we can show on these slides and so much.
I'd like to come in here because I think you bring up a valid point. So in the virtual world, all right, all of us, or most of us, have had to make the not so subtle transition into working basically behind the camera and working through Zoom and Teams and other programs to, I don't know, attend, host meetings, whatever it may be. So sometimes it seems like in the everyday world, the face-to-face world, you may be able to hide some of your microaggressions. But in the Zoom world, when you're on screen and immediately everybody can see a reaction, right? Yes. So
your face. Yep.
So is that how that's working now? With the virtual equity piece, like you really can tell how somebody's feeling, strangely enough, maybe quicker on screen than you could face to face.
Right. Well, that body language, and I talk about it later, but that body language on screen, sometimes it's not paying attention when the person's talking, right? So when the director or the group leader is talking, everyone's face forward, paying attention. And as soon as someone else starts to talk, and it'll be someone that they don't really respect, their head is down, they're moving around, they're not listening, they've decided to zone out. In face-to-face meetings, you would never do that. But on Zoom, there's some assumption that we don't see you, that we don't see your head down, or we don't see that you got up and walked away from the camera. But yes, that's definitely one of the passive, I actually talk about it later, it's one of the passive aggressive ways that people are showing microaggressions through this virtual world, is either not paying attention on camera or turning their camera off during times when you've asked for, if everyone's supposed to have them on, we're all supposed to have them on. Sometimes that's even aggressive. Do we all have to have our camera on? Is this something that, is mandatory? I could have a family situation at home where I have a young child and I have to take care of them while I'm doing this meeting. And so it unfairly, it disadvantages people because it makes them look like they're not professional. This isn't their first priority. The problem was, when our kids were in school, we couldn't afford some folks to have the room to yourself with the door closed. Everyone doesn't have a home office. That itself is an expectation that's discriminatory, to just to expect that you have the space that you need to have an enclosed area and be able to work from home. Everyone doesn't have that.
Definitely. And so it's interesting because in the world that I'm in, and we're doing like trainings online and things of that nature, oftentimes if someone's camera's not on, we do make clear assumptions about their either willingness or desire to be there, or just their professionalism in general. And there could be some extenuating circumstances that are preventing them from being on camera. And whatever they may be, that's their right? But yeah, we're still making assumptions on the other side of that.
And many of our assumptions are based on really our own mindsets, right? So the only time I personally would not consider having the camera off is if I'm not presentable. That's how I think. That's just my assumption, or that's how I would present myself. So my now assumption about anyone whose camera is off is that they're not presentable. But that's not necessarily the case. It may have to do with none of that. I one time had to turn my camera off because I actually had some work being done in my home. And I didn't want there to be this look as though, again, unprofessional, that folks are walking past this meeting, but it wasn't because I hadn't prepared myself to be here. We actually had work going on in my home. So I turned the camera off. I turned, the microphone off. I was so concerned about what the perception would be. And I realized this is a part of this virtual world now. We're really making assumptions, and we're making decisions about what we think people are doing behind their cameras once their camera's off. So yeah, go ahead. We'll do the next slide. So microaggressions, again, here's the reason it's so important, because the microaggressions are the actual manifestations of these societal worldviews. And the problem is they're making assumptions based on inclusion or exclusion, or superiority or inferiority that reflect oppressive worldviews. And this encourages the marginalization of groups in our society. These microaggressions serve to create inequities. They're not, so people want to talk about microaggressions as though just because they're unconscious and they might not be intentional, that they're harmless. They are not harmless. They absolutely create inequities. They serve to create inequities in education, in employment, in healthcare. When people are acting on their prejudices, not just having a prejudice and thinking this way, but the microaggression is the actual act, the manifestation of these prejudices. And the biggest issue for me as a parent and as a pediatrician is to recognize that we aren't immune to actually passing these biases on. Some of these biases are inherited by our children. They're not inherent for them when they're born, but based on the community they're in or based on their environment, they then take on the same biases. And it's unfortunate because they have minds that could be expanded very early on, but and a lot of it is based on gender and race.
So Dr. Yolanda, I have a question here in the Q&A. And it's basically, thank you for touching on the assumptions, right? But they want to know, are we still navigating some of the unwritten rules regarding what is professional or non-professional during Zoom meetings for work? There's definitely a gray area. And how is that? How do you navigate that?
So I think that communication is key. And I think this is the responsibility of leadership. Leadership has to put out what they decide to be acceptable or not, but they need to do it with some sensitivity. They need to do it with some input of those of us who are talking in this area about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the problem is we make a lot of these assumptions because we don't have any specific rules about when your camera should be on, when it should be off. Personally, I don't really feel like your camera has to be on unless you're speaking. That's just my personal opinion. But if you're in a group meeting where everyone knows each other and we're sharing ideas, that may be a different setting. So I think the setting matters, but I think communication is the key. And if your leadership hasn't been clear, then I would ask for them to put something very specific, especially if you feel like you've been targeted a couple of times about something, whether your camera's been on or off or what have you, then ask for there to be some very specific guidelines put out so that you will know and you don't get, there aren't assumptions made that that you're being penalized for because we didn't have this conversation.
You know, I think you're touching on leadership, and I think that's a really big thing. And I also think, you know, as you're seeking out employment opportunities, or maybe you're making a career pivot and you're looking at companies, a lot of times companies are front facing about where they've been successful. So if you take a company like Verizon, right, voted #1 for military friendly companies, right, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Then 13 years in a row, top companies for working mothers. A 100 score on the disability index, right, is one of the 2020 best places to work. And then a great employer for women, right, voted by Forbes as one of the best. So those are environments where the leadership may be a little more understanding about what it is that you need and how to address any issues that come about, even in a virtual setting.
Absolutely. And looking at the leadership makeup, just like you said, those are the great things that they can spout that they've done. And I want to know, are there working mothers in the leadership? Are there, you know, people of color in leadership? Are there young people in leadership? Whatever group that you recognize that you're a part of and that you think you may have been in as you're pivoting in your career, there have been biases, then you want to look for a company that has leadership that looks somewhat like what you're, because otherwise you get to recognize there may not be upward mobility. So you gotta look for folks that look like you to determine whether you think there's going to be upward mobility, because you can't act like you didn't know once you get there.
That's for sure. You know, we got a question here from Wanda, and basically she's asking, you know, just a personal opinion. If you are in a virtual interview and no one has on their camera, how can I analyze that?
Yeah, I think that
as a recruiter, that's a red light.
Yeah. I've been in, so that's a tough question because I've been in, I do a lot of these congressional meetings, and half of the members will have their cameras on and the other half won't. Their aides, it's funny, all of their aides are expected to have their cameras on, but the members don't necessarily have their cameras on. So sometimes it even feels like there's a area of importance that you don't necessarily have to show up on camera. And I don't know what that looks like or what that means. But I do know that if you're the interviewee, obviously you need to have your camera on. But yeah, I don't, the interpretation of what the company, of what you should think about the company, that's actually a very interesting question, because I have been in situations where the higher rank tend not to put their cameras on. And I think that is, that's a little bit, that's privilege. It is what it is, right? That's privilege. Because you coming in, it wouldn't be accepted if you did not have your camera on.
Wow. Yeah, right. It wouldn't be accepted if you didn't have yours, but there's some privilege associated with that. I definitely think that that's the situation with me personally. It just depends on how bad I want the job, right? Because I would probably be offended, but I would probably put my professional hat on. Here's the thing. So there's a series of ways that people interview, and there's a thing, it's called a stress interview, and it's real, right? So sometimes people interview you and they do things to see how you'll react to them. So that may be a strategy that they're using just to gauge, you know, how you're going to react and handle that. And then you can use some behavioral-based techniques to kind of explain that through. But either way it goes, you know, I suggest putting your best foot forward and just going through with the interview and then making the decision at the end.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, go all out. It reminds me of an interrogation though. So you just have to think of it, be ready, you know, get yourself in your head about just saying everything that you need to say and show up. But it does feel a little bit like an interrogation. So you just gotta be ready and put your best foot forward. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide just to get through a couple of things so we can get to the end. So basically this is a quick question. I mean, this is just a quick slide saying that the unconscious bias is the stuff that you think and feel But the microaggression is what you do, is what's done to you. And they feed off of one another, because what you think and feel is what you end up acting on, and your actions give results. And a lot of times, if those are microaggressions from unconscious biases that are negative, then those results are harmful, and those results can actually affect the well-being of individuals who are affected by you. So go ahead and go to the next slide. There are 3 types of microaggressions. There's micro insult, micro assault, and micro invalidation. Most people are sort of aware of the unconscious things, right? The micro insult, they said something or did something they didn't mean to say. They didn't know that you were going to be offended by it. Maybe with the micro invalidation, something that someone in that group, you feel excluded, you weren't included in something, your thoughts are nullified. Again, the all lives matter tends to nullify Black Lives Matter when someone says that. And you're very specific about what's happening right now. This is what we're talking about. No one's ever insinuating that other lives don't matter, but it's really a way of negating and nullifying your real experience by making that statement. But the micro assaults are very interesting because they're not unconscious. They're actually conscious most times. And they're defined as explicit derogatory statements characterizing primarily by a violent or nonverbal attack to hurt a person through name calling. So the point is, it's an assault, but it's not hitting you with an assault, right? I'm not grabbing a stick and hitting you over the head, but it's a true, full-on, understood, conscious decision to call someone out of their name. Especially LGBTQ communities experience this a lot. Our trans communities experience this a lot, where someone just thinks that they have the license, if you will, to name call. And it's very hurtful, and it's very aggressive, and very discriminatory. But that's the one that's conscious, and the other 2 are unconscious. And go ahead to the next. So examples of microaggressions in the workplace. This is the part that I wanted to get to. So you're different. I don't know what that always means. Sometimes, I think people often think they're giving you a compliment, when many times they're saying you're different from what? You're different from what I expected. You're articulate. I've been told after giving a talk that I was very articulate and very eloquent, and I thought, I'm double board certified. What did you expect? I've heard, someone, as Black women, hair for us is an accessory. And so someone will see you and then say something like, oh, your hair looks so much longer today. Then and I know that there's a major difference between how I wore my hair last week and how I'm wearing my hair in these braids or whatever this is. So it's an obvious question about my culture and my, ethnicity, that instead of asking the question you really want to ask, you make this glib statement. So I'm going to ignore you and say, yes, it is. Thank you very much. Many times you may hear, what do your people think about this? Well, what are my people? My people as women, my people as Washingtonians? What are you asking me right now? Or I didn't get this, but my brother did. Why do you sound so white? When you're articulate, when you don't have slang or vernacular. And so that's the problem, because the conversation isn't about whiteness. It's about what good English and bad English is. You've assigned a color to what the English language sounds like. This one I'm going to say right now is actually one of mine. I get it all the time when I'll be in a room. I've given instructions. I've given the diagnosis. I tell them the prescription is going to be sent. And then they'll end with, oh, okay, well, but when is the doctor going to be in the room? Okay. If you want to wait until the doctor gets in the room, then go ahead and sit here. But I am the physician. I just did the whole interview. I introduce myself as such, but because people will tell me I don't look like a doctor, I look like a nurse, or I look like whatever they think I look like, they will literally not hear me say Dr. such and such. And at the end of the conversation, they'll ask me when the doctor's coming in. And it's happened on several occasions. It's happened to other people too. But that's one of my own that I wanted to share. Well, great school, you see a degree on someone's wall, and they'll ask, did I get a scholarship to the school? So these are microaggressions that are based on assumptions that are made when you look at someone. The next one is about the virtual world, right? This one, I've had several people send out to me, not pronouncing someone's name or spelling it correctly, but
Hold on,
egregious.
Dr.
They will
Yolanda.
ask, look at this. They will ask them to write it phonetically.
That's killing me. That's killing me.
Right? Like, are you serious right now? So I've had people tell me that someone will ask them, can you just write it phonetically so we don't pronounce it wrong? No, I'm not doing that. Or can we call you Katie? If someone gives a name and it's a long name, and a lot of people that I know, a lot of my Asian friends will do this. They basically will say, look, or friends I have that are from Africa that have they'll just go ahead and cut it short and call themselves something else, because it makes it easier for everyone else. And I keep saying, don't do that. Make them work, make them understand what your name is. Interrupting someone when they're speaking. So, in the virtual world, someone will be talking about something and you're supposed to be on mute, but there are those people who will unmute themselves and talk over someone or begin a conversation because they're just being rude, and they can be. This is the only time that you can mute somebody and not mute somebody is in this virtual world, right? So this is actually when people have become very aggressive. Making assumptions about seniority or expertise just based on appearance. So someone's on the screen and they're assuming that the speaker is this person, but it's the Black woman on the right, and they're assuming that it's the white male who came on the screen, and that's actually not today's speaker. And then we were talking about this earlier, ignoring an individual while they're speaking, visibly not attentive, and sometimes even turning the camera off could be passive aggressive in this virtual world. So those are some of the microaggressions in the virtual world. Go ahead. The issue is that these microaggressions have a macro impact, especially on people of color. Macro meaning large, micro meaning small. So the cumulative effect of microaggressive behavior has been researched. And basically, it has been shown that there has some devastating effects on well-being and health specifically. So there are ways that people respond. The stereotype threat is that person who is so worried about being stereotypical. I know women, Black women, who won't wear their hair in ethnic ways because they don't want to be stereotyped. So they refuse to wear braids, or they refuse to wear, especially on Zoom. So a young lady was talking about going for an interview. So there are people who the stereotype threat is going on an interview and being afraid to have your, show your ethnicity in that interview because there's these ideas and stereotypes about what Black women or Black men or anything that's connected to a stereotype. So then you're so busy trying to avoid it that you're stressing yourself out. Imposter syndrome. This is a feeling of self-doubt, personal incompetence that persists despite your education. Again, you have your degree on the wall, you'll have your the letters behind your name, but people continue to treat you in such a way that you begin to doubt and question whether you belong in a place. And that's done because there's enough microaggressions, enough insults to you and assaults to your character and to your competence, and you begin to question yourself. And then just simply bad feelings of self-confidence, poor self-confidence, depression, poor self-image, as a result of these multiple daily verbal and nonverbal cues that you don't belong here, that you don't, respect who you are, or what you offer. And it creates this internal frustration, anxiety, trauma, and just a true sense of not belonging. So the psychological distress, again, the anxiety, a lot of times this anxiety comes with a hypervigilance to sort of prove yourself, prove that you belong there. You're overdoing it. You know, we've been, many of us have had this said to us growing up, you got to be 3 times better or 4 times better. As a Black student, you know, I went to a white college, a predominantly white college, PWI. And I remember the conversation my mother had walking out the door on my way to school, that I had to be 10 times better than, you know, the student next to me because I was going to be judged differently. This is something we tell our children. So best believe you get to that point where you're at work and you're hyper vigilant, you're overly concerned about your performance. And it's just unhealthy for us and for our well-being. It can get so bad that you're depressed and hopeless. And some people have had suicidal ideations as a result of microaggressions in the workplace. It does lend to trying to do things to deaden these feelings, like binge drinking. And some people get to the point where they're just so fatigued they can't get out of bed, or pain, illness. And let me tell you why pain and physical illness can happen. Go to that next slide. So there are actual physiological things that happen with stress. So you have this, these are the degrees of stress. You have this positive stress everybody has, because I don't want you guys to think stress isn't normal. Stress is normal. There's positive stress where your heart beats really fast because the dude you think is, you know, good looking is walking by, your heart palpitates a little bit and you get a little stressed out because you want to make sure that he sees you, or, you know, the job, the promotion that you're looking for, you're waiting for the email or the phone call. So you get intensified, you know, focus, your elevation of your hormones, and your heart beats a little fast. That stuff is normal and it's positive. You even need it for things like basketball games and activities that you're in. Then there's tolerable stress. That's that stress that you have an event or an activity or a paper or a presentation and you're up all night and you got to put the hours in, but you know it's going to end soon. So you just have to do it until you're done with that. That's tolerable stress. Or you have an exam or something that you're studying for, a certification. You need to get these certifications so that you can go for this job promotion. That's tolerable stress. The toxic stress is the intense, prolonged activation of these hormones, these stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And this is the stuff that when it's going on for so long, it actually begins to hurt your body's system. Show the next slide. And how does it do that? So it's a continuous and repeated activation of the fight or flight response. We're supposed to know something's wrong, respond to it briefly, and get out of there, right? That's that fight or flight. So either I need to like get myself together and fight for something, or I need to run. The rush of hormones and emotions that happen right there should be very brief. Maybe, like I said, it's tolerable if I'm working all night on something, but you'll get burnout of your system if this is every day, all day. Every time you get to work, you're stressed because you don't even want to be there. While you're there, things have happened 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. By the time you get home, you just cannot wait to get in that car, or get on that train, or whatever it is to get you out of this situation that is causing you that much stress. Physical health issues are that are aligned with this increased adrenaline and cortisol as a release of the hormones into your body, and it gives you high blood pressure. It gives you chronic inflammation. That previous slide said pain, fatigue. That stuff is from inflammation. So it's real stuff happening to your body. It's not just that you're stressed out. And high glucose levels. Do you know that the stress of some of these situations are causing people to become pre-diabetic, diabetic? And then low bone density, very easily injured. And then once you're injured, it's very difficult for you to heal from these injuries. This is all from just being stressed out. And so we call it toxic and sustained stress. And it has physiological features. Go ahead. So we talked all about the problems, all about the stuff that could happen, all about how to recognize if you're stressed out and maybe again having some of these physical issues. But we want to talk about some solutions. And I don't think any solutions are possible unless you actually put a plan together, you have a strategy, and you put some effort toward it. So that's why when you're talking about solutions, you have to actually think of something that's going to be done. You got to bring in some people that can change an atmosphere or an environment if it's pervasive. Go ahead. So one of the things I love about this topic is that our brains are not static. Our brains can actually relearn things. We can rewire them. So if people have these biases, these unconscious biases, implicit biases, we can actually unlearn these biases. We can actually deconstruct the ideas that we have about people, these stereotypes that we have about people, even at my old age. And an organization's impact can only be as strong as the willingness of its people to take on perspective of others. You've got to be able to see from someone else's point of view. It's worthless if you can't. I don't think that any service that we provide is for you, the person that provides the service. It's for other people, right? And so if you're providing services for other people, the whole idea, the whole concept is you're looking into what do others need and how can I provide that service? Just doing that alone, if you're an entrepreneur, you're working for someone, just being a good customer service agent means you think about what other people need. So this is not a new concept. We should always be thinking from the other person's point of view. Good managers will walk through where they work and look to see what the customer sees. They want to know what is it that's being seen when they walk through my. So that's what we're talking about, just looking from someone else's perspective. This is a busy slide. I just want to talk about breaking the cycle and that where microaggressions happen. It's funny to me when I was doing this that microaggressions have the same abbreviation as myocardial infarction. That's an MI. So as a physician, when I see MI, I think of myocardial infarction. That's heart attack. And microaggressions have the same abbreviation. And I thought about that and went, that's so interesting because myocardial infarctions or microaggressions will affect the heart. High blood pressure, hypertension, that's kind of stuff. And so it's very interesting that it does cause the same, it can cause some of the same insult to the heart. But breaking the cycle is just being aware of the unconscious bias and developing policies if you're in an actual workplace, we need to talk about them so we can develop some policies that make it, make the playing field even, but you have to put the effort in. We can't just have people talking about how they felt after a meeting and there's nothing in place. There's no policy. There's no person to go to. We were talking to someone earlier and they're in HR. Your HR department has to have something in place that says, hey, you can report something that you're feeling or something you experience without repercussion. That has to be key. And we were talking about this earlier. If you're looking to get into a company, you want to know what are some of their HR policies. Go ahead, Kenneth, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's stay there because there's a question in the Q&A and they were asking, how do you deal with microaggressions in the workplace? They lost their job last year after bringing concerns to management and HR. And initially when I read that, I thought about their processes, right? So in a virtual world, a lot of times that, we're not having face-to-face conversations. So there should be a ton of documentation leading up to why you're coming to HR with this. So you should have, I would hope you had a case that was documented prior to coming to HR with that particular complaint or that particular concern, should I say. And it's terrible that this person that they lost their job after this, but yeah, you protect yourself. I think that's really important in a virtual environment.
I say this all the time. I document everything. everything, conversations. And like you said, it's harder in the virtual world if this is a Zoom meeting, but I'll document conversations I have. If it's a meeting, I'll say, oh, hey, I'm going to go ahead and record this. Mostly I'll say, because there may be something you tell me and I need to recall it, and so I want to jot it down, but I'm also protecting myself, because what I don't want is a patient to have said that this happened or that happened, and they told me something, and all I have is this, it's me. In fact, we can actually document better now because I can record a conversation on Zoom with telemedicine. But it is very unfortunate if this happened to that person, and you have to be able to document.
Indeed. And speaking of recording, I've seen this come in the chat a few times. This and all Digital Career Success Series episodes are available on the Urban League Jobs Network on YouTube. So please feel free to go there to see this actual episode and any other Digital Career Success Series.
So I just saw someone say something about a GM that said you don't want to be the tallest midget. Is that what I saw? Did you see that?
I did not see it, but I'm in here now.
Oh my goodness, I'm looking at that and I'm like,
I saw your face.
That? Right, because again, the general manager is using a term that apparently they think is okay to use, and might be funny, but who would say something like that? And that's the hard part, when your actual leaders say it, right? When your manager or your supervisor says something, and you're in shock and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to address this? I think there really does need to be opportunities to have positive feedback. Let's actually go to that slide, because there's a couple of other solutions that I have. So one of the things that I think you can actively do is what they call narrative guidance, right? Yeah, we know midget is no longer an acceptable term. That's why we were so concerned that the general manager would even say that. Someone was like, that's not a term that you should use. I'm absolutely 100% aware of that. I have several of my in fact, one of my favorite pictures I saw last night, I know that, so I would be so shocked if the general manager said something like that to me. But here's some of the stuff that you can do, right? So counter stereotypes. Instead of attempting to suppress stereotypes, because here's the thing, we can't take away the stuff that we know that's happening, that people are hearing in the world, but what we can work to do is promote opposing narratives. So a lot of times there's a narrative about, people's accents or the types of food you eat or whatever. I don't want to throw stereotypes out there, but you may have a stereotype about something, or have heard a stereotype about something, and having activities or things that your group company does, whatever they do, in terms of even some of the icebreakers that you do, really finding ways to have time to promote opposing narratives about some of these stereotypes, or debunking the stereotype myths whenever you have the opportunity. But I will add, the problem is you have to make sure that you're using people with lived experiences and expertise to help you along this line. I remember the first time we had them tell us we were going to do some diversity, equity, and inclusion exercise at my particular institution, and they wanted a privileged white woman to come in and have this conversation with us. And it was not authentic. It was not a conversation. It was just stuff that was read about, that she was talking to us about. But, we started to ask, has she ever experienced any of these things that we were having this conversation about? And she had not. So you got to make sure that you're inviting the right people to the table. And if you see that your company has not done so, then have that conversation, make that suggestion. Somebody who does this, ask if you can suggest that they bring someone in that could talk about these areas and speak to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The next one is about cultural humility. We have to recognize that we don't know all the answers. We don't have all the answers. We have to remain humble and maintaining this interpersonal stance that we could always learn something. It's a lifelong commitment. I say this all the time. I'm old, right? I'm 51. So when gender fluidity became the issue that we had to sort of recognize and traverse, I was very conscious about the fact that I need to recognize and know who someone is, who they, what they want to be called, because it is their right to be called exactly what they want to be called, not what I'm assuming I should call them based off of biology, because as a physician, I know that this has been a sex assigned at birth. That is something that I'm very, very passionate about. You don't call someone out of not just their name, but out of their gender or whatever they want to identify with. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes. So
I'm done. Yep, that's it. Because we were literally, it's cultural humility. And the last one is being a good bystander, an active bystander, knowing to be actively dismantling, these comments, behaviors, but you have to educate people where they are, invite them to do better, and not criticize or ostracize. And it's just an ongoing conversation. And if you do this ongoing conversation, then it's a way to promote an environment of growth. And that was it. That's the last thing to be said. These are just suggestions. This is one of the things I was talking about, be mindful of your language. And instead of just using words like, hey, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, ma'am, sir, you're already assigning a person a gender when you do that. So recognizing that that's actually a place that we need to be conscious about now. So, a friends, team, hey folks, hi everyone, how are you? You don't have to assign a gender, but we've gotten so used to doing that we have to be careful.
But I personally need to get better at that. So I'm glad you shared that slide, because that's something I need to be mindful of.
Lastly, the resilience piece, things that you can do, because all of this isn't going to go away. It's not going to go away. So what are some of the things that you can do to build your resilience while we're making the society or the company better? They say that, supportive groups, ethnicity, sitting together or not commiserating, maybe communing together is a protective factor. But I like to talk about mindfulness, things you can do to reduce your personal stress, right? So mindfulness, like meditation, breathing exercise, walking during lunch, getting away from get away from your computer, get away from the office if you're going into the office, take a walk. Timeouts are not bad. I love a good timeout. And so a lot of times as adults, we need to give ourselves time away from what the area that's causing us stress, whether that's the building or the computer or what have you. That's it.
All right.
Did said they use a coloring book. That's actually a really good technique.
So this slide is your books that are out. So introduce us real quick so we can work our way out.
Yeah. So these are the books that I wrote during the pandemic. I have one more that's going to come out, and we're going to do a documentary. But these are healthcare workers of color, and they're just telling their stories, our stories. Each one of these has a chapter of mine as well, of how we showed up in the pandemic in our white coats and our Black skin, experiencing George Floyd's murder, experiencing all the racial tension, the insurrection, all of the stuff that was going on around us, and still showing up in our white coats to help others when we knew we were traumatized.
Next slide.
That's
all right. You know what? Hey, real quick, there was a question in the Q&A, and it was about, it was regarding ageism. What I will share, because we don't have a touch of time, but if you visit YouTube and Google the Indeed, so the Indeed job platform, I did a workshop on avoiding ageism, and it's called a Jobcast, and I also did one on Beat the Bias. So those are available on Indeed. If you reach out to me directly, I will send you links to those, but I really appreciate the question. And if you need or want to follow Dr. Yolanda, she's active on IG. I'm a big follower of her IG feed. You can catch her on LinkedIn. You can catch her on Twitter, of course. And my information is there as well. On behalf of the Urban League, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Yolanda, for coming and hanging out with us. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of Verizon, please visit the Verizon Talent Network to apply to opportunities and just to learn information about Verizon. They are a great sponsor of ours and one of the world's leading providers of technology, communications, information, and entertainment products. Verizon truly is transforming the way we work. We were working here today, let me tell you that, Dr. Yolanda, wow. So next week, not next week, I'm sorry, the next Digital Career Success Series, listen, we set on a run of this yesterday and the energy in the room was amazing. So please come back October 13th and join us for Women in STEM with Kimberly Gray and Ashley Furness. And I believe that Ashley is, she works for Budweiser, and this is actually sponsored by Anheuser-Busch. So with that in mind, October 13th is going to be amazing. Speaking of amazing, you were amazing today, Dr. Yolanda. Thank you so very much for joining us. Shout out to Nicola Evans for connecting these dots for us, right?
Absolutely. She's phenomenal. I'm going to watch this one though. I love girls, women in STEM. I got to see this. So
it's going to be amazing. Please do tune in. October 13th at 12 p.m. here on the National Urban League Digital Career Success Series. On behalf of the National Urban League, Wanda Jackson, Kanjik Jordan, Adanya, Dave, and the DCSS team, I'd like to thank you for making this a great day for us today. Thank you so very much.